Welcome to Empower, the podcast dedicated to the conversation about women's empowerment and workplace equity in the affordable housing industry. I'm Nicole Graham, and together with my co-host, Tanya Dempsey, we invite you to join us on this journey to explore, enlighten, and inspire. Each episode of Empower is more than just a podcast. Honoring its mission to amplify voices, Empower is a platform where voices are heard, stories are shared, and change is ignited. We delve deep into the challenges, triumphs, and innovations in affordable housing through the lens of women's experiences and leadership.
Our guests are changemakers, trailblazers, and thought leaders who bring a wealth of knowledge, experience, and passion. From policymakers to community advocates, from industry veterans to newcomers making waves, we bring you candid conversations that uncover real stories behind affordable housing. Our goal is that by empowering women in the affordable housing sector, we are not just building homes, we're building a movement. So whether you're a professional in the field, someone who's passionate about social change, or just curious to learn more, Empower is your go-to source for insights, inspiration, and inclusive dialogue.
Today, we're actually super excited because we have a very different format where we have turned the tables a little bit. And my usual partner, Tanya Dempsey, is actually one of our participants today as we are focusing on AAPI issues in particular, featuring two distinguished guests who bring a wealth of experience and insight. First, Tanya Dempsey, whom we all know and is also co-host of Empower. Tanya has an extensive background in public policy and urban development. She is a financial advisor to public agency clients on structuring and implementing affordable housing projects. Her career also includes pivotal leadership at the New York City Housing Authority and New York City Housing Preservation and Development. Alongside Tanya is Lisa Lim, whose distinguished legal career has focused on real estate finance and development with a specialization in affordable housing. Lisa has recently taken up the role of general counsel at the New York City Public Housing Preservation Trust. Before this, she was a partner for nearly 9 years, where her practice involved a substantial focus on multifamily housing and economic development. She also has background in the public sector. Together, their diverse perspectives will help us explore their unique challenges confronted in their respective careers, like implicit bias and gender inequality. We look forward to a great conversation today that will not only educate, but also inspire our listeners to engage and advocate for AAPI representation and equity in all spheres. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's get started.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very honored to be part of this podcast with Tanya.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I would love to just kind of start with you and just go through a couple of the questions that we typically ask our guests. Tell us your story. How did you get here?
Well, I think I've had a very blessed and fortunate career. I feel very lucky. I've been able to zigzag really between the private and the public sectors, and I've always had really high-profile assignments. I feel very fortunate in that regard. Lawyering is not easy, and I've been doing it over 30 years now in different contexts. So I've worked with both of you, and it's been a distinct pleasure at the Trust and previously with Tanya at NYC and with you, Nicole. So I started at NYC in 1990 as an honors associate. I had just graduated from Fordham Law, and I went through sort of a rigorous program there for 2 years, and I rotated between departments. And I really found that public housing was very interesting. It was so multidimensional. We had like 100-lawyer legal department at NYC at the point, and I had a lot of fun in that honors program. I then went over to the Attorney General's office and was in the Labor Bureau for 2 years, and that was a great experience. The Attorney General does really great defense work for the state, so defending many of the state agencies. It also has affirmative litigation. So I was there at the AGs during Robert Abrams' tenure, and then I came back to NYCHA and was in their employment litigation practice. That was great because I really loved the people that I was working with at NYCHA. I think the most transformative job I really had was my next job, and that was my tenure over at the New York State Housing Finance Agency, also known as HFA. It's now under the HCR umbrella, but it was a really great time to be there. I was there for 8 years and moved from a management position focusing on employment and labor and sort of policy and litigation. I went in with that skill set. And I actually, during that period that I was there, ended up at the advice of my general counsel, said, we do deals. It's our bread and butter. We're a bond issuer. We're very prolific in New York State. You ought to do some deals. So I started doing deals. And I was a second chair, and we had a great team there, and everybody was really collaborative. I worked with some of the senior lawyers there, got to know how to do deals, what issues are important for the agency, how to really reduce risk for the agency. And we drafted a lot of the documents and negotiated those. I was there from 98 through 2005, and it coincided, luckily, with the city's rezoning. So that was done by the Bloomberg administration. So a lot of industrial areas were rezoned residential. And HFA was typically the first investment in there to establish a residential neighborhood. So we were the first in Williamsburg. I closed the Schaefer Brewery deal. We were the first in Clinton, just when things got reestablished to go in and to really settle it down as a residential area. So I ended up closing 40 deals at HFA because I went from first chair, and I found that I really liked doing deals. And at that point, I thought that my tenure really was very fortuitous in the sense that it coincided with these rezonings. We had a really prolific pipeline. At that point, we did a lot of 80/20s in the city, and most of the large family real estate developers came through our doors. So it was a great time to be there. It was very busy. From there, I actually went to Herrick Feinstein. I went as counsel, and I ended up working in their real estate group, doing a lot of construction loans with a hospitality focus. And that was great. And then there was an opportunity during the recession to go back to NYCHA. It was about 2008 because they had a huge pipeline that they had developed. Tanya was there. They didn't have the ability to close a lot of these deals. There wasn't enough legal infrastructure there. So they started the red team within the law department. And I was one of the members of that initial team. It was about 5 or 6 of us. It was exciting. We had deals to close, and it was a fun time because we had to work closely with the development group. We worked with Tanya in finance. And I think that was the beginning of NYCHA really being able to efficiently close real estate deals on some sort of scale. And so I fiddled with the templates, like I got the closing checklist, more organized, and we were able to close a whole pipeline. It also coincided with the mixed finance project that we did in 2011, which was the largest LIHTC deal. And Nicole, you and Tanya were both involved. And I think it really was a great opportunity for NYCHA just to get some extra operating subsidy in the door. So it was a great time. I was on the plan to preserve public housing. It was a task force. I created a CDE for NYCHA. And it was all good stuff. But there was this lingering capital deficit. And I felt like I finished up at NYCHA, and then I went to ESD, where I worked on the Mitchell-Lama portfolio there, which had been developed by ESD. And REOC was actually one of their spinoffs. And I had a couple of focuses. I restructured the Mitchell-Lama portfolio, so we tried to stabilize it more. We tried to refinance it.
And because some folks may not be familiar with the specifics of New York City, could you spend just one moment specifying the Mitchell-Lama portfolio and ESD?
Yeah, so ESD is Empire State Development. It's also known as the New York Urban Development Agency, UDC. So it was basically set up under the Rockefeller administration when there was a lot of flight out of New York to kind of come in and do large projects that would be good for the economy, would revitalize things. So the Mitchell-Lama portfolio was something that ESD financed initially. It was set up for middle income. It was subsidized. Most of those properties had an income limit that was at a moderate income cap, but it also was subsidized often through federal subsidies. So each of those properties probably had a contract, reduced the interest rate. It was an operating subsidy. So it was like a whole type of affordable housing, but it was really geared for middle income. And those had sort of a regulatory scheme that then expired after a certain point. But Roosevelt Island had a lot of Mitchell-Lama. That was an island that ESD developed, and the first housing that went in was Mitchell-Lama housing. The crown jewel, I think, of my deals was Cornell Tech, which I closed at ESD. And that was really transformative. It was a collaboration between the mayor's office, the governor's office, REOC, their board, Office of the Budget, Cornell. We really had to get a deal done. There was like a time frame to get it done. And everybody was motivated, and we cut a deal that created some community benefits, some things that REOC residents really cared about. They wanted debris barged off the island, they not to go through the streets and create dust. They wanted regular construction hours. They wanted some programming for the local schools that was STEM related. So it was all like a very good project. And I feel like it was the beginning of tech in New York. So it was great for the economy.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That was a great crowning achievement. What year was that?
Cornell Tech was 2014. There was quite a bit of drama because there was some NIMBYism. People didn't want to, people that had been on this bucolic island really didn't want a huge campus to overtake the island. So there was some NIMBYism. So there was some assurances to the residents and trying to give them what they wanted to make the construction period go more smoothly for them. All in all, it was a great win for the city. So I wrapped it up at ESD. I went over in 2014 as a partner in the real estate group. And it was an interesting time because I was the first female partner to come into that group. And
rock star.
Yeah. Well, it was just the timing of everything. And I wasn't super young, but I was also a younger partner. To give the group more energy, I came in with 2 other male partners and were friends. And it was just to give a lift to the existing demographic there. And it turned out to be a great fit for me. So I built deal by deal, client by client, my own practice there. And I ended up bringing 50 new clients into the firm. I was there for 1 years, but it was, over a period of time. They were all types and they were diverse. I had some not-for-profit clients. I had commercial property owners, hotel developers, multifamily, mixed use. So there were different types of clients with different needs, legal needs. So half of my practice was really being sort of an outside general counsel because a lot of these property owners, they were at a certain scale, but they didn't have inside legal counsel. So I sort of served that purpose for them and that goal. And then the other side of my practice was transactional, and that was just closing deals. And we developed an affordable housing finance practice there, which I really headed that group. And we closed a number of deals under my tenure there. They were deals that were the typical affordable housing deals with the typical sources, but each deal is tricky. Each piece of real estate has its unique challenges. So they were bonds, tax credits, subsidy, other sources that came in to bridge the gaps. So it was fun. I actually helped a client, a not-for-profit health clinic, do their first ground-up construction project. It's called HealthView. It's in Flushing. And they had never done ground-up construction, so we would help them through that whole process. They had other counsel, but we held their hand through some of those issues. And then we financed it. So it was a mix of the Build NYC tax-exempt bonds, and then we did new market tax credits, and we did city capital and then they had their own equity. So it was kind of fun to do that deal and to see the project too. The projects are all great. They're all fun to see. So in a nutshell, and I came back in August to the trust because NYC is my old agency. It's a unique opportunity, which you guys are helping us. You're invaluable to really set up the trust well and to get it operating, and so it can do deals. And we have 2 deals in the pipeline where the residents had voted in. So we're trying to do the pre-development. We're trying to get the construction piece going. We're trying to do the design piece. We're also trying to get the finance piece together. So there's also a complication. They're going to convert from Section 9 public housing to Section 8, which has a whole regulatory scheme to them. So it's all good stuff. It's all very challenging.
And I might add, you all are doing it in a very innovative way that really hasn't been done across the country. So it's going to be super exciting. And as a side note, I really appreciate the value that you bring from all of that transaction experience, Lisa, and just sort of like watching you and working with you for the trust and your ability to kind of like hone in on some of these items that could be glossed over. But your tremendous experience, are like, no, we got to call this out. We've got to deal with this sooner or later. So it's very much appreciated.
And I appreciate you and Tanya because I think you bring so much financial expertise and HUD expertise to our deals. And they are so complex. They're not just affordable housing, but it's got the whole conversion component. And then they are very complex deals. But thank you.
So I do think that's what keeps us all interested, right? All three of us, right? So
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
pretty cool. Thank you very much, Lisa, for giving us that background. And I do want to go into questions to both of you, but I also want to take a moment to talk about the fact that we talked about this as a panel, and with two tremendous representatives, two people does make a relatively small panel. So I wanted to ask Tanya, maybe you could sort of expand on how we became a mini panel, if you will, today.
We wanted to do something for AAPI month because there's a place for it. And I have noticed that in the marketplace, there isn't a big push for celebrating AAPI month or AAPI in general. And so we had cast a wide net of women who we thought would be really interesting to talk to related to different kinds of issues facing Asian women. I think that it is an uncomfortable conversation to have for a lot of women, even getting folks to come on the panel to talk through women's issues or gender bias, right? Which is what that is. We often struggle with that. So there are many women who have said, I love what you're doing. I love that you're actually shining a light on these issues, but I do not want to participate because if I tell my story, everyone is going to know who I'm talking about. And I think that was a pretty powerful message back, that there was a hesitance and apprehension and fear related to really calling it out. So there are a few women that have told me their stories. And so I will share their stories as we're answering some questions, just to contrast. I mean, I think they'll probably be very similar stories to stories that I have and the stories that Lisa has, just because I think that it's more universal than anybody really knows. I think that we just don't do a good enough job kind of calling out and talking about it. So I'm very eager to dive into some of these issues.
Right. Thank you for that context. So let's go ahead and jump in. I did want to talk a little bit about gender inequality, right, and impacts of that. We have talked before about implicit bias on the podcast and on different sessions, but just to hone in on what we're talking about there, right? So implicit bias is when we have sort of automatic, unconscious attitudes or stereotypes that influence how we think and act without us even realizing it. So this is very distinct from overt racism, which I am sure you have also confronted, right? But I think a lot of the stories that we hear are more about potentially like implicit bias, where maybe essentially less overt. So the implicit biases can go against what we think we believe or what we consciously value, but can often affect our behavior and decisions in ways that are unfair and discriminatory. This applies both to racism and sexism and all of the isms, right? These implicit biases. But I just wanted to kind of speak to that specifically. So just sort of jumping in on questions, would either of you be willing to just share a time when you encountered implicit bias in a professional setting? And how did you handle the situation?
It's hard to be a woman in real estate, in commercial real estate, because there aren't that many women decision makers. And with a male figure, a male persona, you can actually instantly have credibility. And I think as an Asian female, it is harder to establish that credibility. At first glance, people have a bias, they have a stereotype. It's hard to show that you're a leader and you're competent and a qualified professional. For me, there's always been a little bit of a period where when people get to know me, that's not what their first reaction is, that I'm qualified and I'm competent at the very top of my game. But I think over time, I've earned that. So I almost kind of expect it now. And I think when I became a partner, I felt like maybe that title helped me also. Like I'm a partner, I'm an equity partner. I'm one of three in the office, in the New York office. So I think that helped me get that instant credibility that you sometimes have to prove. But I think it's hard. I don't think it's easy for women. I think that it's just, you have to work harder. But overall, I think if you stay focused, you know what you want, you know what you need to get for your client, you'll prevail. I'll turn it to Tanya.
So I have a story from a woman who said that she was a young architect and she was at her review and she was like a go-getter. She works Saturdays, she works Sundays. She was like, they're early, they're late. And the man who owned the firm said to her that she would never be anything more than like a senior architect. Really hurt her feelings. Mm-hmm. And she mulled that over for a while and eventually just started her own firm because she was like, what's the point? I'm killing myself and you don't think that I'm good enough to promote. So it was interesting because when she told me this story, I said, right, you and I and you, Lisa, and you said it, achievement is a value set for us. And we believe very specifically that if we work really hard and we prove ourselves, that we will eventually get the promotion and we will eventually make it. That is a value set that we have. And I don't know that that's actually, like for her, she was like, that wasn't like, he was very clear. It didn't matter how hard I worked. Right. I was never going to change the way that he viewed me. And that's like super powerful because
her on her own entrepreneurial venture, which I think is amazing.
It's a great story, but it's also their shame. And I think that's part of why we don't talk about it, because she said that because she was working so hard, she never reflected enough. And so she literally said to me that maybe if I had more soft skills, I would have been more successful, right? So there's two things, right? There's the implicit bias of the employer that she wasn't good enough. And then she then took that, internalized that to say, okay, what can I do better? And maybe I need to not only work harder, but work harder at specific social skills because that's what she saw other people doing who worked less hard and got promoted. So it's this interesting thing of like, yes, I'm all for self-improvement. I love self-improvement. I love everything about self-improvement, right? I'm here for it. But at the same time, it's like, wait, it almost felt like she was blaming herself for not getting ahead when she was working really hard.
That's interesting. I feel like maybe there was some blaming herself, but then the realization she can do her own thing.
Exactly. No, it's a great outcome, but it was like this evolution of like how people feel and how that one comment changed her life. Obviously for the good, right? So I mean, I don't know.
In this case, there's a happy ending, but
I mean, I face implicit bias like all the time. And I didn't realize that it was actually a thing until like kind of recently when I've been astutely paying attention. So when you think of Asians, and there's even this like whole thing on like this model minority and this concept of model minority, which totally exists. You think of a passive, nonverbal, very accommodating persona, which are all opposites for me. I'm here, like I embrace it. I am who I am, but that doesn't mean that makes people very uncomfortable. That's the point that I was making, right? Because of that, it makes people very uncomfortable. And there are multiple times where people have been like, well, just be less. Right? Just be less. And I personally really struggle with this of like being authentic and sort of true to myself and to my personality. And then am I doing this because I want to make other people feel better? Is that what I'm doing? Or am I doing this because honestly, I'm still working it out, but it's like, am I doing this because I want to gain better influence? And so joke's on you? I don't know.
Right. Is it people pleasing or is it self-improvement? And the line between those two can be blurry sometimes because sometimes self-improvement does please people,
Right.
But sometimes people pleasing is just, it does a disservice to ourselves.
I think the example you gave was also interesting, how the soft skills, and there is something cultural to Asian culture. I myself, it's like, you got to work, put your head to the grindstone. You got to keep going and work really hard and produce the best product. But there is less focus on soft skills in Asian culture. It's much more of a meritocracy. Like if you work hard, it's not so much that you did the politicking, but you will get the result. And that's kind of the Confucian work ethic. So there's not a big focus on the soft skills, which in reality can probably get you further than just doing hard work. It's almost like you need a balance between the two. And maybe sometimes in Asian culture, that soft skill component is just not the focus. So you don't get that balance. So I'm aware of it. I have 2 boys, and we've said to them, really, to achieve a lot in American society, you really do have to have the soft skills. Pretty early on, we brought them to cocktail parties. You've got to have these skills to go around the room. It's just another skill. It's not something you can't develop or practice.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. You mentioned 2 things that I want to touch on. One is that there is a cultural barrier. And that cultural barrier is that there is a strong work ethic and a high value on achievement and working hard and meritocracy. I thought that's exactly right. That's a thing. That is a true thing. And there isn't a lot of forgiveness, I don't think, for that. Let me say this slightly differently. It's very easy to be taken advantage of because you are an achiever. So you are going to work harder because of the meritocracy, right? That's how you think the world works. But it turns out that's actually not how the world works. And so again, there is this, I think you're totally right. There needs to be some kind of balance. But again, there's a real cultural barrier there that is also, I think, contributing to bias.
And in that regard, right, that cultural barrier is similar to what we see with women in general. And it's less about the work ethic, but more about like the promotions or seeking jobs, right? It's the maybe not confronting it, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe not asking for what you're entitled to, right? What you're worth in terms of promotions and pay and things like that. So I don't know how much that plays a role as well.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious, Lisa, when you negotiated being partner, did you seek that opportunity out or did they come to you?
It's kind of interesting. Actually, I think I worked with a headhunter who I trust, and she helped me kind of navigate that part. I'm all for having professional support in that regard. But when I went in, I wasn't an equity partner. I was an income partner. And I had to kind of build my practice up for a couple of years before I met the threshold for equity partner. But I think I've been actually very lucky in the sense that I haven't been an associate in a law firm, which can be a pretty intense and grueling experience. I've kind of gone in to the law firm sort of at a counsel and then a partner level. So it's been a different dynamic for me. But I think there's a lot of competition for partnership in law firms, and people compete very hard for that. They work very hard. They set it as their goal for years. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. So it's just like how you comport yourself, what the business is like, who you're working with. There's so many factors that go into that. Like, this is the spot I should go into.
Right. And then you earned it. I mean, you brought in 50 new clients. You were a total boss. You earned it. I think you have been very lucky. I also feel very lucky that the meritocracy value has definitely served me in my career and definitely served you in your career, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing in that context, because I think it's really just kind of also finding the right jobs that value
in the right environment, that nurtures you, right, professionally. And that gives you the growth that you need. And I think it's really finding that fit, really, for each individual, each professional. And it's not easy. I mean, sometimes you may try something and then it doesn't work, you'll reverse. And those moves are actually easier to do when you're younger. When you're a little more senior and older, it's harder to make those transitions.
Lisa, I'm curious because you have had such a broad career, right? Working in many public agencies, you worked with the one firm, but even there, right, you had 50 clients. And so they all had different natures, right? Some were nonprofits, some I'm guessing were corporations, some may have been governments. Did you encounter what you would consider implicit bias or explicit bias, sort of more or less among different groups?
I think I've been treated fairly. The clients are all different. It's 50 individuals or 50 principals, right? So they're all going to have their own biases. And what I found is it wasn't actually hard to market to the Chinese American community because I lent a certain credibility that they wanted. I was in an annual 100 firm. So I didn't find that was really hard to market to. Again, I think in any organization, if you have the title and that sort of spot, you can use that to leverage and to market. And you don't have to waste too much energy. You'll have sort of walking in the door, they'll know what your status is.
Well, it really underscores the importance then of having those, whether that's, for some people it might be like an academic pedigree, and others it's title, but to lend credibility to kind of set you up for better success.
Yeah. With private clients and public clients as well. I mean, it's the meritocracy. They want a result. They're trying to achieve something, right? Whether it's to close a deal or to reposition something or do a workout. So if you can help them do that, they're really, they can be lovely because you're helping them do this. It's collaborative. At the end of the day, you get the result for them. You can send them an invoice, but it's all good because they've achieved the result that they want, on a business level. I feel like it comes down to your skill set plus also how you can deal with your client and other, adversaries or, other, wherever you're going with your lobbying efforts, your advocacy. So it's all kind of tied together. And I think at the very core of that is your basic self-confidence. Like if you can master that, right? And you can take it and you can do this for this client or that for this client, it builds upon itself. It's like one deal at a time, one client at a time. You just keep building.
I was actually going to say, we're talking about stories about how women have had things a little rough and how there have been some instances where you were treated unfairly or an Asian woman was treated unfairly. And instead of kind of looking at that and saying, that's their problem, that's their implicit bias, what I'm hearing, which is super inspiring, is that you're like, well, I just keep moving forward and I gain confidence from the work that I do, and you gain satisfaction from the work that you do, which almost you don't see it. It's actually it's amazing, Lisa.
It's very inspiring.
It's so inspiring. It doesn't
own. It's like competing against yourself, like using your own internal barometer, the infinite game, right? Yeah. Rather than the externalities.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that I've always been kind of an independent person, so I haven't kind of used external so much for measurement or for my own self-esteem. So I feel lucky in that regard because I don't really want to go through life feeling very torn and emotionally frail. I do want to feel like I can master it. We can do it. It's a teamwork, but it's collaborative. We're going to get there and everybody will be happy with the result. So that's really how I approach my work, and the people that my clients, either they're in government or privately, they're going to be better positioned.
Boom.
It's amazing.
I'm so impressed. That strikes me as conveys such wisdom. The word that springs to mind is just self-actualized.
Yes.
So maybe we'll take that inspiring opportunity to wrap up. But I appreciate so much both of you joining. Obviously, Tanya, you're the co-host, but I appreciate how you thought about organizing it and the outreach that you did, and the conversations that you had and some experiences that you shared. And I feel very fortunate to have been able to participate and talk with both of you.
Here's another story that happened in real time. Okay. I was at a conference and there's a gentleman who's very prominent in the affordable housing space. And we've been on a bunch of calls and they're closing calls. So, there's 50 people on every call, but I am sure we have met him multiple times. and completely, totally did not remember or know any of our names. And I use this story because I'm curious to see if that's ever happened to you where you felt totally, completely unseen, despite the achievement, despite the fact, sometimes we're like leading the calls.
Yeah, I think that's probably happened to me, Tanya, where I thought, oh, I know this person really well and maybe didn't get an acknowledgement. But I also think this is the other thing that I find that's very interesting. I'm not that great with faces outside of like the certain context. Like if you're used to seeing somebody here, like on a call, and then you see them like in real life, like I'm not great with connecting those two contexts together. But I think we stand out very much as Asian American women because people remember us. Like if we walk into a room and we're like the only one of that demographic, people will remember you, right? Much more so than if you didn't stand out in the crowd. So I actually, sometimes in the situation, that's the reverse. Like people remember me. And then because I have that like little difficulty in connecting people up in different on Zoom versus in a conference or at a law firm versus, somewhere else. Sometimes I feel pretty bad because I'm like, they know me and I'm like, I'm struggling, It's like, I can't put the space, like I know you, but it's like, I can't get the name out. So I actually feel like we stand out a lot in commercial real estate and people will tend to remember us.
I thought that way too, Lisa. That's why I was so surprised. I'm like, I definitely stand out. I don't know. It was very funny. We laughed. I'm obviously not offended by it. It was one of those things where I was like, I'm curious. It's kind of like we had someone else on the podcast who was like, yeah, the same dude introduces himself to me. And I'm like, yeah, I run this group. What's happening? Like, why do you keep introducing yourself? And that person is also a woman of color. So again, it's one of those weird things that I think you're totally right. It's either everyone remembers who you are or no one remembers you.
Yeah, I think it has happened to me, Tanya, but I feel like put your blinders on, just keep going.
No, you're inspiring. You're truly inspiring in that regard. And I love it. I'm aspiring to be more like that.
You are very inspiring. I think what you do is such a great service for all the agencies and all the clients that you represent. It's really invaluable. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for joining us. Thank you for having this conversation with us for AAPI month. We will talk with you soon. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.